Hello everyone, Jason from Truth Behind the Magic here. I think this is going to be an exciting topic, something that I was not expecting to come up, but something I was definitely interested to read about. We're just going to get right into it here. This is something I discussed a little while back, when it was just very early stages of this process. Nothing was really formalized. This was kind of just getting thrown around as like basic preliminary information. But anyway, now they've gotten to the actual planning document stage, which is what has been released. The Central Florida Tourism Oversight District has released their updated planning document for Walt Disney World for the next 20 years. This is something that they do periodically, which is exemplified in the actual article packet that they release, which I will link in the description because that's where I'm getting all this from. And that's exemplified because in the document, they literally took the year 2020, which was previously on it, and quite literally X'd it out and put 2045 next to it, which is just kind of funny, but I get it because there's no reason to type up a whole new 600-page document. Also, there are sections where Reedy Creek Improvement District is literally crossed out and replaced with Central Florida Tourism Oversight District. And as far as I know, this has not necessarily been approved yet. It hasn't been voted on, but this is the official memorandum that they're releasing on this matter. Now, I'm going to give some kind of technical details here, but I'll try not to keep it too boring, because kind of give my input on some of this information. Some major developments are given the green light through this document, and the details of this are on pages 231 and 232 of the PDF that I've linked. 13,275 hotel rooms are approved by 2045, and that is massive. I don't think they'll end up using that much, but Coronado, for example, which is where I worked on one of my Disney college programs, as far as I know, that's the largest Disney resort by acreage, and one of the largest by room count, and just for example, that is 2,400 rooms, so they would have to do that essentially 5 times to actually reach this limit, and I just don't see it happening, even in 20 years. That is a lot of rooms. A new 18-hole golf course has been approved. I think that could be good. I haven't played at any of the courses at Disney before. I really would like to. If I knew people to play with, I probably would have used the discount and done that when I was a cast member. But it's really, they're usually pretty busy. It can be difficult to get a reservation sometimes from what I've heard. So building a new one could be good, but that also takes up a lot of space. So it just depends. There's sort of a risk-reward with that. Moving on, 400,000 square feet of office space. I guess that would just be standard if it's needed for things. 450,000 square feet of retail and restaurant space, and I remember when I talked about this a few months ago, or I guess maybe it's been a year now, I would imagine that would be additions to Disney Springs, because they treat that differently from the rest of property. And if you look at the PDF of this project, you'll see that they have it listed as commercial space instead of entertainment, so it's kind of its own thing, and I'm sure a lot of that has to do with the fact that a lot of the people there are third-party vendors and that sort of thing, but that's why I think this retail and restaurant space that they have allocated is probably specifically for Disney Springs, would be my guess, if they ever expand that. The big things here, it greenlights 1 major theme park and 2 minor theme parks, which I think is the same as the verbiage that had been previously released on this. But that's where we really get into the deep details of this video, because the real question most people have is, where will this be built? And I would say after that comes, what will it be based on? what intellectual property will we see there. But before you even get there, you have to answer, where is this literally going to go? If you're someone who's been around Disney property a lot, cast member, local, annual pass holder, you know that there's enough space for another theme park, as well as more resorts, that sort of thing. But I have to admit, I was even kind of surprised when I really got into the nitty-gritty of these details, looking at the maps that they provide in the PDF, just how much of this is conservation land. I knew a lot of it was, but that's going to be something I go over in detail in this video, is what land is actually usable now. And it really comes down to a few things. Of course, like I said, a lot of it is a protected conservation area. And really, even the areas that aren't, a lot of them have kind of swampy conditions, because it, of course, is Central Florida. And that brings me to kind of a big point here, and that's a lot of the land at Disney is in a, what they call, 100-year floodplain. And if you look at the map of the floodplain and the conservation areas, most of the conservation areas are that floodplain area, which I would imagine that's why they designated those as conservation areas. A big part of it, at least, because they really can't use them. But even then, they do have workarounds for some of that floodplain area, which I'll get into the different designations here in a minute of usable land. But for the most part, they want to stay away from that. Because I think I already said this, but a direct quote was, "Development in the 100-year floodplain shall generally be discouraged." That was on page 225 of the PDF. And that kind of brings me to the topic of what will they do when they build this, because pretty much anything is going to have to be drained to even put something there. And another direct quote on page 225 says, "The drainage impacts of all future projects shall be fully mitigated through a combination of improvements to canals and or culverts, on-site retention and detention of stormwater, and maintenance of the flood carrying capacity of the floodway." So I would say, regardless of where they end up building, they're going to have to divert some canals and waterways and things and drain the land. But anyway, to get out of the weeds here, pun intended, get out of the swamp here, maybe onto some more interesting information. 923 acres is set aside for hotel and resort development, which, going back to the 13,000 rooms statement, that is massive. Coronado Springs, for example, is about 150 acres, and like I said, I think that's the largest resort at Disney by land size. It's basically the same size as Magic Kingdom. So 923 acres, it would be crazy for them to reach that, honestly, in 20 years. That much new resort space. 550 is set aside for the major theme park, which, just for some comparison there, Epcot is 305 acres, which I think Epcot feels like the largest park in terms of area that you can actually walk. Going around the World Showcase, as I'm sure you know, that can be a pretty serious effort sometimes. Animal Kingdom is 580 acres, but that includes the Safari/Animal Reserve area, which of course is a lot of that park's acreage. I think Epcot is definitely bigger in terms of where you can actually walk as a guest. And now we'll get into the different designations of usable land here. 2,168 acres is listed as suitable land for construction. And this is on page 259. These next few topics are on there. But suitable is the best of the best. It's not in the 100-year floodplain. It wouldn't take major drainage or anything like that to build on. It doesn't have major constraints. It is the creme de la creme of land available. And behind that is marginally suitable, which they have 2,463 acres. And the marginally suitable area is above the 100-year floodplain mark, but has constraints to development, would probably take a lot more irrigation and that kind of thing to be able to actually build. And if you go way back in Disney history, they were going to build a few more resorts around the Magic Kingdom area, but they tested the ground and just found that they weren't going to be able to do that. But in fact, the new Lakeside Lodge that's opening eventually, if it ever does, I mean, I think it is now. I just talked about that recently, but we'll see. That's on one of those locations where they previously had decided that it wasn't suitable, so they can, as technology moves forward, find new ways to build these things. And now we come to the worst of the areas that could potentially be built upon, and that's 1,717 acres of what is listed as marginally unsuitable. And those ones are inside the markings of the 100-year floodplain and have significant constraints. They even list out in this document what it takes to be allowed to build in that 100-year flood plain, and it's pretty serious. All right, now this is going to be probably the deepest and funnest part, at least for me, and probably for the viewers as well, I would assume. On page 259, they start talking about the specifics of what land can be developed, where it is, where they expect stuff to go. And what they say here, a direct quote, is during the next 20 years, the district's development is expected to occur in those areas identified as suitable in the above analysis, which is what I just was discussing. And the largest areas of suitable land are located west of Animal Kingdom, is the first one. And that's a pretty sizable patch of land. I don't know that it's going to be large enough to host a theme park. It potentially could when you look at it right next to Animal Kingdom. It looks like it is potentially possible. Would maybe be a little bit tough there to have a full parking lot and everything on that land, but it is something that might be attainable. And all the land there is listed as either suitable or marginally suitable, so that's a pretty good patch right there. The next one on the list here is what they call between World Drive and I-4, as well as between Osceola Parkway and US 192. The majority of this area is around the ESPN Wide World of Sports complex, and the area in the large circle there that is directly around ESPN is listed as suitable, with some being marginally suitable and a little bit being marginally unsuitable, but most of that is actual suitable development, which is good. The left circle there is the Osceola Parkway and 192 area, which is actually mostly marginally unsuitable, but the upper portion of the line there along the road is suitable, with the outside of the top kind of being marginally suitable. Not a lot of potential right there, but you definitely could see a resort, maybe even a water park. I mean, Blizzard Beach is already right there, so maybe it would make sense to have another water park right there. I mean, it's overall, these two circles, especially the ESPN area, is a really nice piece of land, one of the largest chunks of full suitable area that they discuss. I'm not sure what the large rectangle is in the upper left corner of the big circle. It looks like it's kind of an industrial area, or potentially some of it even being overflow parking for events at ESPN. But that would probably have to be relocated, essentially, if this land was going to be developed for anything big. I definitely don't think it's big enough to put a theme park on any of this land without the complete demolishment of ESPN Wide World of Sports, but I think it's very promising as a future resort area, with maybe 2 or 3 themed resorts within that area. I think it's very promising for that. Moving on here, they say the next area is, and I quote, around Lake Mabel, which Lake Mabel is to the northeast of Bay Lake. I was actually not even aware that this was Disney-owned property. It's kind of disconnected from the rest of property. This land is mostly suitable, with some of it being marginally suitable. The area I have circled is the area of suitable for the most part. If you go below, right below the circle, there's that straight line. Below that is Disney property as well, but it's listed as marginally unsuitable. So this is like the area I think they would be considering building on, is right next to the lake. Maybe we could see some kind of resort here in the future. Maybe a water park, something outside of property, because it's going to be right next to that residential neighborhood, so it would be kind of interesting what they would put there. I would maybe even wager if they're going to do office space, maybe put it there. It's just kind of an odd area. Probably the most odd of any of these listed. Moving on, north of the Magnolia Golf Course. This is another really serious one. This appears, at least visually, to be the largest of all the future construction areas. And it really is, it looks like nice land. And it's made up, for the most part, suitable land, with some of it being marginally suitable. So this is a very promising area. Of course, you can see there is a little bit of infrastructure for probably Magic Kingdom or just some general Disney infrastructure located within, but it doesn't look like it's anything too major that it couldn't be relocated. So I think that's a very promising area. Moving on from there, the next area is east of the Magic Kingdom parking lot, or the TTC. This one I think is pretty interesting. As you can see on the picture, it's 2 kind of disconnected circles. I mean, they do connect, but they're not congruent, obviously. Well, that's an oxymoron, but you get what I'm saying. They're not... They're just connected very slightly at the bottom. And these are mostly suitable / marginally suitable, with the surrounding area around there being marginally unsuitable outside the circles. This is another very promising area. It's a pretty large segment when you consider both of the circles together. And now, finally, the last one is west of Hollywood Studios. Not a very big chunk of land. The highlighted area is the suitable area, which is surrounded by marginally unsuitable for a lot of the other woodland areas around that circle. And this is one that definitely is not large enough for the major theme park, but I could definitely see another resort being there. That's really a prime resort area. Coronado is, of course, right next to there, which Coronado is technically considered an Animal Kingdom resort, even though it's actually closer to Hollywood Studios. So putting another one even closer, it would definitely be a pretty sought-after resort for the Hollywood Studios area. Maybe potentially a water park or something here as well, because once again, Blizzard Beach is right there, so maybe you could just have them in the same area. And the last thing they say is there are other areas that are identified as suitable, but they are scattered throughout the district on sites of less than 100 acres. So that is how they end the discussion of the prime future areas. Now, which areas do I believe have the highest chance of playing host to a new major theme park? To me, the area west of Magic Kingdom is very promising. I honestly did not know that Disney had that much land up there. I definitely think it's large enough to build the park and the parking lot and everything that goes along with that. it could be nice to bolster the northern end of property with a resort there. Or, sorry, not a resort, a theme park there. Because Magic Kingdom, as you know, it really is kind of on its lonesome in terms of property. It doesn't feel like it because it's not that long to drive there, but aside from the resorts there, it is kind of its own deal, so it could be nice to bolster that end of property. But for me, I personally really like the area east of the Transportation and Ticket Center. I think it has the infrastructure. You have World Drive, which is one of the, I would say, top 2 most important roads on property, maybe the most important. You have the monorail track that already runs right up there. Maybe they could do a spur line or something to service this new theme park if it was in this area. You could also do it at the northern property, but I just think this one already has better infrastructure. The only thing with this, though, it is definitely more constrained than the area west of Magic Kingdom. Like I was saying earlier, you have the two kind of congruent areas, but it would have to be... It would be an oddly shaped theme park. But some are. So, I definitely think it's possible, but I'd be interested to see if they could come up with a way to combine these two areas and still keep it as one park. Of course, the parking would have to go in there somewhere. Maybe you put that in the bottom right circle and just have the upper one as the theme park. But I just think it would be very interesting to see the park layout and how they would make this work. But I like that spot, honestly. But it is, of course, close to Port Orleans, close to Epcot. It is a pretty packed area of property already. But really, either way, either of those two main sites would kind of bolster that northern end of property. The second one, not as much. So I think it'll be interesting. The area west of Animal Kingdom is also another possibility. I know I said earlier, I don't know if it looks large enough to put a major park there. I frankly doubt it. But they could find a way. They could do it. So that is an interesting option as well. I think those are the only 3 that you could fit a major park on. And I remembered hearing years ago that Disney had enough land for at least 2 more major parks. And I think even though they greenlit 13,000 hotel rooms and all that acreage, I think they should keep in mind that the final goal, I say final, who knows, they could end up purchasing more property somehow or something crazy, but I think the final goal should be to have 6 parks. I don't see why not, so I would keep that in mind when building anything else. Don't overdevelop the property so much that you don't have enough space for 6 parks, because I do think Disney eventually could sustain that many. I think they need to build a 5th one, as I've said time and time again, to truly compete with what Universal has been doing. I hope they're serious about this. The previous one of these things that they put out years ago, it also had provisions for a 5th park, so it is more of a, regimental thing, just kind of a formality putting out this document. It's certainly not a guarantee that they will build one, but I really hope they do this time. I just think it's about time that they get serious about this, and like I said, build one before they overdevelop anything else. We don't need 10 more deluxe resorts before you build another park. Like I've said before, I really would like to see another value or moderate resort. It feels like we're never going to see a new one again. But if they build a 5th park, they will have to build another moderate and value, at least, I would imagine. That's another thing to keep in mind, which of these areas is close enough to another suitable area to build some resorts nearby. But they don't have to be nearby, particularly as long as they're on property, because that's already how Disney operates anyway. But yeah, I'm very interested to see how this ends up. Sorry if this was kind of a rambling video, but I hope you enjoyed the illustrations and kind of getting a grasp like I have. I've just been learning throughout all this today, but just a grasp of what is available to Disney and what they can still develop. And other than that, I'll see you next time.